Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're exploring a really important intersection: entrepreneurship, the experiences of people with disabilities, and the kinds of resources out there that can help.
Yeah, it's a critical area, and we've pulled together some great sources to help us unpack it.
We have, first, there's a How to Start a Business Guide for Entrepreneurs with Disabilities. From AmeriDisability, pretty direct stuff.
Right. Then for the big picture, the Annual Report on People with Disabilities in America, 2024, from the University of New Hampshire Institute on Disability.
And that one uses the American Community Survey data, the ACS, right?
Yeah.
And we should mention the pandemic affected the 2020 data, so some comparisons might be a bit tricky there.
Good point. We've also got the Guide to Disability Rights Laws from ADA.gov, sort of the legal foundation.
And to get into the how-to of inclusive workplaces, how to create an inclusive environment, 7 skills leaders need, from DDI. They're a global leadership consultancy.
Then there's funding crucial. We're looking at maximizing disability grants for small business success from Open Grants.
Focusing on how grants can boost accessibility. And finally, a business plan template, actually, from Third Sector Dumfries and Galloway. It's geared towards social enterprises, which often have inclusion built in.
So our mission today really is to pull out the key insights and resources, stuff that can genuinely empower individuals with disabilities who are thinking about or already running a business.
And also for anyone listening who just wants to help build a more inclusive business environment, some practical takeaways there too.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's start with the foundations. The legal rights and protections. That feels like the right place to begin.
Definitely. And the big one, as the ADA.gov guide makes clear, is the Americans with Disabilities Act, the ADA.
That's the cornerstone legislation.
It really is. It prohibits discrimination based on disability in so many areas.
Yeah.
Employment, obviously, but also state and local government services, public accommodations.
Like shops, restaurants.
Exactly. Commercial facilities,
Yep.
transport, even telecommunications. It's very comprehensive.
So how does the AD actually define a disability? Because it feels like that could be interpreted in different ways.
Well, the official definition is a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities.
Okay, substantially limits.
Yes, and it's not just about a current impairment. It also covers someone with a history of such an impairment, or even someone who's just perceived by others as having one.
That's interesting. So it's about the limitation, not just the diagnosis.
Precisely. The impact on major life activities is key.
Now, for entrepreneurs, Title I of the ADA, the employment part, seems particularly relevant. What are the main things to know there?
Right, Title I. It applies to employers with 15 or more employees, and it basically mandates equal opportunity in all aspects of employment.
Hiring, firing, promotion, pay.
Training, recruitment, benefits, everything. And importantly, employers generally can't ask about a disability before making a job offer.
Okay.
And the other huge piece is reasonable accommodations. Employers have to provide these for qualified individuals with disabilities, unless doing so would cause an undue hardship for the business. Think significant difficulty or expense. It's a high standard.
And reasonable accommodation itself, that could be a lot of different things, couldn't it? Like modified equipment, maybe a different schedule.
It could be, yes. Physical changes to the workplace, accessible technology, modified policies, job restructuring. Lots of possibilities.
Where can someone find good information on what counts as reasonable? Say, an entrepreneur setting up their business or someone needing an accommodation.
The Job Accommodation Network, AskJan.org, is the go-to resource mentioned in the guide. It's fantastic, packed with practical examples and guidance for specific situations, really useful for both sides.
AskJan.org. Got it. And what if someone feels they have faced discrimination under Title I? Is there a time limit?
Yes, there is. Generally, a complaint needs to be filed with the EEO's, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, within 180 days, though sometimes it's extended to 300 days, depending on state or local laws.
Okay, good to know. The ADA guide also mentions some other laws. Can we just briefly touch on those?
Sure. The Rehabilitation Act is important. Sections 501, 503, 504, 508. These cover federal employment, federal contractors, programs getting federal funds.
And Section 508 is about accessible tech, right? Like government websites.
Exactly, making electronic and information technology accessible. Yeah. Then you've got the Fair Housing Act, prohibiting disability discrimination in housing, requiring accommodations there. The Air Carrier Access Act for airlines, and the Voting Accessibility for the Elderly and Handicapped Act, ensuring polling places are accessible. They all fit together to create a wider net of protection.
That's a really helpful overview of the legal landscape. Thanks. Now, let's maybe pivot to the statistics. The annual report you mentioned, it paints a picture of the current reality, doesn't it?
It really does. It uses that ACS data to track key social and economic indicators for people with disabilities compared to those without. Things like employment, education, health, poverty.
Areas the National Council on Disability flags as crucial. So what did the latest data, 2021, 2022, tell us about the gaps? Let's start with education.
Okay, well, looking at younger adults, say 25 to 34, the gap persists. A significantly higher percentage of those with disabilities had less than a high school diploma compared to those without disabilities.
Still a big difference then.
Yes. And conversely, a lower percentage held a bachelor's degree or higher. There was maybe some slight positive movement between 21 and 22, but the gap is definitely still there.
What about employment and income? Obviously critical for entrepreneurship.
Right. The employment to population ratio, basically, the percentage of people working was much lower for those aged 1864 with disabilities.
Although, didn't you say the 2022 number was a historic high for that group?
It was, which is encouraging progress. But still, a very wide gap remains compared to people without disabilities. And when you look at earnings for full-time workers,
A gap there, too.
a significant one, yes. Median earnings were considerably lower for workers with disabilities. And this ties into poverty rates, which were also substantially higher for adults with disabilities aged 1864.
So persistent economic disparities.
Definitely. While some numbers shifted slightly year over year, those core gaps in education, employment, earnings, and poverty are still major challenges.
And what about things like health insurance or getting around?
Well, overall health insurance coverage is high for both groups, but there's a gap in private health insurance coverage. Fewer people with disabilities have it. That can impact access to certain types of care.
Makes sense.
And for transport, fewer workers with disabilities reported using mass transit to get to work. The report also notes things like a higher percentage living in institutional settings and a lower percentage living in newer homes built after 1990, which might correlate with accessibility.
And there was something called the Disabling Environments Index. What's that about?
Yeah, it's an attempt to measure kind of the environmental barriers people face, things like accessible transport, housing affordability, community support. It gives a broader context to the individual stats.
These numbers really do ground the conversation. Okay, let's move towards more practical advice. The AmeriDisability Guide you mentioned first, that's aimed right at entrepreneurs with disabilities.
Exactly. Well, we don't have the full guide here. Resources like that are vital because they can offer tailored advice, understanding the specific journey. And building on that, the DDI article on inclusive leadership is relevant for any business owner.
Right. DDI argues that good leadership is inclusive leadership. What are the key skills they identified?
They lay out 7. First, build empathy. Really try to understand your team members' perspectives. Put yourself in their shoes.
Crucial. What's next?
Communicate inclusively. Be mindful of how you speak, what you say, how it might land. Subtle things can exclude people. Leaders need to model this.
Okay. Number 3.
Facilitate inclusive meetings. Make sure everyone, truly everyone, has a chance to contribute ideas and be part of decisions. Maybe use different methods like chat or partner discussions, not just speaking up.
Good practical tip.
4th is inclusive delegation. Don't just give tasks or authority out of habit or to your favorites. Be thoughtful about who gets what opportunities.
Avoid those unconscious biases.
Exactly. 5th, give honest feedback. Build a culture where ongoing feedback is normal, which helps reduce bias over time. Get feedback from diverse sources, too.
Makes sense. What's 6?
Coach for growth. Resist the tendency, which many have, to only coach people who are similar to you. Nurture everyone's potential. Differences actually boost engagement.
And the last one?
Nurture an inclusive mindset.
Yeah.
This kind of underpins everything. Practice inclusivity daily in those small moments.
Right.
That's what builds the culture.
Those are really powerful skills for any leader. Okay, let's talk money. Funding is always a big hurdle. The Open Grants article focused on disability grants. How do they help?
Well, as Open Grants puts it, these grants can be a real game changer. They provide non-repayable money specifically to help businesses become more accessible and inclusive.
So for things like ramps or maybe special software?
Exactly. Wheelchair ramps, accessible restrooms, assistive technology, specialized communication tools, things like that. Given the economic gaps we talked about, these grants can really help level the playing field.
So how does a small business owner, maybe an entrepreneur with a disability themselves, actually go about getting one of these grants? What's the advice from Open Grants?
They offer some solid steps. First, Really understand what these grants are for. It's not just cash. It's about creating that welcoming environment.
Purpose-driven.
Second, craft a strong application. You need to show the impact clearly. Why do you need this upgrade? What difference will it make for accessibility and the disabled community? Use concrete evidence and make sure the title and summary grab attention.
Okay, compelling case. What else?
Leverage resources. Talk to disability advocacy groups, your local chamber of commerce, small business development centers. They often have expertise or workshops.
Use the network.
Definitely. Also, look for grant matching programs that can double your funding. And really network with those advocacy groups. They know this landscape well.
Makes sense. Any pitfalls to avoid?
Compliance is key. Understand all the terms and conditions of the grant. Keep meticulous records of how you spend the money. Communicate progress. Be transparent.
Good governance.
Absolutely. Monitor and report effectively on the grant's usage and impact. And finally, don't be afraid to seek professional advice. Grant consultants or legal experts if you need it. They also point to disability.gov and the SBA, the Small Business Administration, as places to start looking for grants.
That's a great practical roadmap for grant seeking. Okay, one last piece. Business planning. We looked at that template from third sector Dumfries and Galloway aimed at social enterprises. How does that fit in?
Well, social enterprises often have social aims baked right into their model, which aligns really well with inclusion. But the template itself covers the essentials for any business plan.
Of what?
It pushes you to define your why, your social aims, who benefits, your vision, but also the basics, your product service, understanding your market, your competitors.
Do market research, basically.
Yes, and crucially, engaging with your potential beneficiaries or customers early on. Does your idea actually meet their needs? Is it accessible? Then it covers strategy, legal structure, the financial plan, identifying risks.
Standard business planning elements.
Right, but always tying back to those social aims. It also emphasizes understanding your target market. Who are your paying customers? They might be different from your beneficiaries. You need a marketing strategy, branding, pricing.
Got to make it viable.
Exactly. Understanding startup costs is vital. And very importantly for this kind of venture, identifying how you'll measure your impact. How will you know if you're achieving those social aims?
Measuring success beyond just profit.
Precisely. And finally, identifying and engaging stakeholders who can support you along the way.
So bringing all this together as we wrap up, we've covered a lot. Legal rights, the statistical picture, inclusive leadership, funding through grants, and planning with impact in mind.
Yeah, the key takeaways are really about understanding that foundation of rights through the ADA, facing the realities shown in the stats, but also seeing the path forward through inclusive practices, leveraging resources like grants, and planning intentionally.
It really highlights the potential, doesn't it, for individuals with disabilities to succeed as entrepreneurs and for all businesses to become stronger by being more inclusive.
Absolutely. And maybe a final thought for you listening. Think about how integrating disability inclusion isn't just a nice to have or a compliance issue. How could it actively strengthen the economy, drive innovation, and ultimately foster a more equitable society for everyone?
A powerful question. And we definitely encourage you to check out the resources we mentioned: ada.gov, askjan.org, disability.gov, the SBA, open grants, and look into inclusive leadership development. There's a lot more to explore there.